My name is Shannon Brett and I am the creator and the curator of the exhibition Rite of Passage, showing at NorthSite Contemporary Arts from the 24th of September through to the 21st of November. I am a proud Waka Waka, Bachelor and Gurang Gurang person currently living in Meanjin, Brisbane, and I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal peoples as the traditional owners of this beautiful place that I'm lucky to be living upon and calling home. The exhibition Rite of Passage is a project that I created a little over 2 years ago. For one, as a response to the glorification of colonisation in this country, but additionally to provide clarification around a myth of a man in James Cook, who has become like a poster boy of whiteness. As this year's celebrations were due to unfold for the 250-year anniversary of his brief trip to our country, I decided to create an exhibition that would give voice to those who think differently about celebrating James Cook's perceived notion as pioneer of Australia. One of my goals through Rite of Passage was to further educate people in our greater community about who Lieutenant James Cook actually was, and also give the public an opportunity to do some research of their own around something separate, like providing opportunity to clarify truths and individual histories that perhaps not all of the general public might be aware of. There are many important historical facts to uncover about this beautiful place that we all exist in, and there are truths that need to be told and ultimately acknowledged by everyone. So this exhibition allows the artists of Rite of Passage to place forward their realities and or their families' truths while exhibiting artworks that give voice to their experiences as Aboriginal people. So today I would like to introduce to you two artists of Rite of Passage in Judy Watson and Carol McGregor. Judy, can we start with you? I find your career and your journey just so astounding and mammoth. Can you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself as an Aboriginal person, artist, creator, extraordinaire, and educator?
Hello everyone. Yes, my name's Judy Watson, and I would also like to acknowledge traditional owners in Brisbane for this Meanjin, where the exhibition began and also where it's going up to at NorthSite in Cairns. My Aboriginal family are from one New language group, and my grandmother was born at Riversley Station, so that's in the northwest of Queensland in the Gough country. A lot of my family lived in Mount Isa, that's where my mother was born. I was born in Mundubbera and then grew up in Brisbane. And I started studying at Darling Downs Institute of Advanced Education, now the University of Southern Queensland, straight after school, worked for a while, and then to save up money to go down to Tasmania to study, and that's where I studied a lot more in printmaking. And then I went up to Townsville after that and started teaching at the Townsville College of Tape. And I taught printmaking up there as well as drawing and sometimes other subjects. So that's where I really started my teaching as a young person. And then I continued teaching at various places around Australia, including Canberra School of Art, where else? University of the Northern Territory, which was called Northern Territory University. Now it's Charles Darwin University.
Oh yeah, yep.
Done a lot of bit of not so much teaching, but sometimes some perhaps mentorships in a way, working with students at Griffith University. And I've run a lot of workshops around the place and short stints, with schools, etc.
Fantastic. And can I just ask you personally, with regard to your practice, and in terms of this exhibition, who was Cook to you, and what, in terms of how you see your practice and the things that you make, what do you think the big deal is about Cook?
Yeah, well, I think I've been listening to quite a few radio interviews with various historians about Cook. And so for a long time, he wasn't that important, really. It just seems to depend on who is wanting to organise celebrations and what that's about, on their own journey. So I've been seeing exhibitions around the place. For instance, recently at the British Museum, there was an exhibition which focused on Tupaia, who was this amazing navigator who was on Tahiti, but was from, I think, Rotuma. And so that's a story that we don't hear very much about. And the fact that both, Tupaia and other people were taking onto the boat. So it wasn't just Cook, it's sort of like saying that all of these explorers came to Australia, Cook discovered Australia, and that there was no agency or no possibility of there being other Aboriginal people here. So I think that, when I went to school, I learnt about a very different Captain Cook, who wasn't even a captain at that stage, who came out to Australia. And I really did not know about, for example, the Guigal Shield, and the fact that Cook's first response to Aboriginal people was to shoot them, at Kamay, Botany Bay. And I have since seen the shield, the Guigal Shield as it's called, which obviously got taken when it was dropped by one of the two Aboriginal men at Kamay. And you can see the hole through it, and there's dispute over there as to, oh no, it's not a real hole from a bullet. But actually, when I was there with the whole delegation of other Aboriginal people, it looks exactly like the hole that would have come from, the shot that, Cook would have used.
Yeah. And that story is fascinating also in that Tupaia was, there's just no mention about island people travelling and using these boats as transport to promote their own, agenda for trading. So trading these trade routes that lay throughout our country have been existing for such a long time, and there's proof now that they existed upon the seas as well. So it's really interesting. It's really interesting, the history, and I hope that through exhibitions like ours, we're able to further educate our national community in terms of how advanced Aboriginal and Islander people are and were in their thinking, and that we did not need to have someone of British descendant discover us. Also, Carol, I'd like to hear from you. Can you tell our audience exactly who you are and how you see your practice and why you make the work that you make?
Well, thanks, Shannon. Hi, I'm Carol McGregor. I'm of Wathaurong or Wadawurrung descent from the Kulin Nations of Victoria. And I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of the lands on which we are all gathered on. And actually, I'd also like to acknowledge the continuation of cultural and spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that still reside in our country today. And I think that's important, and some of the points I want to point out as an educator at the moment, working for the Contemporary Australian Indigenous Art program at the Queensland College of Art, Griffith University, teaching Indigenous students and art, and also about their cultural histories. So I just want to acknowledge that continuum of those cultural and educational practices.
Fantastic.
Yes, so my work centres around looking at the continuation of our cultural practices, but also of our guardianship of country. And for me, Lieutenant James Cook was an expert navigator, but his view, which represented Western views, I suppose, of the time, just seemed so arrogant. Cook felt he was part of and I have to be hard-hitting with some of these words here, superior culture, why our ancestors were regarded as the uncivilised other existing in the wild landscape. And I just want to look at this discussion and my work from an Indigenous point of view, that there was no wilderness. Connection to sky, waters, land, and all living things has been our underlying spiritual heart for us for tens of thousands of years. And totemic systems and family systems meant that every living thing was carefully and logically cared for, ensuring the health of country and our communities. It was an ecological philosophy that was enforced by law, and our people, and we live to ensure this. And I think that Captain Cook had, he wasn't Captain, you fall into that.
Yeah.
You fall into that, don't you, Captain Cook? He was a lieutenant at the time. And he had many observations of our people, especially when I think in northern Queensland, when he collided with coral reef. He spent 6 weeks with the Endeavour was beached, and he appeared there at Gungadi, which was renamed Cooktown on the Wallumalburu River, which he renamed the Endeavour River. And so for 6 weeks he was there on Gough country, and he made lots of observations, and he had a lot of interactions with the Gough, but I just feel that he just ignored those immense relational biocultural knowledges and our deep knowledge systems and the responsibilities that we held for country, and it was just ignored. And to me, that was the beginning of the land was seen as terra nullius. Yeah.
That's a fantastic description of really exactly what many Aboriginal people and non-Indigenous people are growing to know and learn as time goes by. Carol, I just have to mention, I love the way, I'd like to begin with some images shortly, but I'd like to quickly discuss your work and the way that you entangle all of your lived experiences into your work, making it contemporary but with utmost respect to your history and your family story. The work that you've been making and the work that's in Rite of Passage, your cloak, we'll show shortly. But can you just briefly tell us, how long have you been producing these cloaks for?
I think I started about 10 years ago as part of my undergraduate studies, because my family, my great-grandmother, Annie Robertson, was, taken to New Zealand, where she was brought to New Zealand, where I was born. And so we lost a lot of connections to our culture. We were really isolated from that, but our family always knew we're Aboriginal. But just losing those connections, I felt that I needed in my art practice, I was discovering more of our family history, but I needed to just make those deep connections. And through my fathers, it was my father, my grandfather, and then Annie was the first female. And just looking at the history of the Kulin nations, and particularly the Wadawurrung, the possum skin cloak, the iconic possum skin cloak, and the images on the cloak that were scraped and marked with ochres. A possum skin cloak was very much your own identity. When you were born, you were given a few skins, and then they were added onto and these images and designs were of totems or your personal joint journeys or tribal designs. So they were your identity, and I felt that was really important to talk about that visual language particularly with my family. I think the first cloak I made was a cloak for our family, and it almost was a healing cloak, and just including images that were very important. I think every possum skin cloak, contemporary and traditional, was hugely significant, and they're almost personalities. And I think the cloak that I've made for this exhibition is the same. It's very, to me, holds very important knowledges, but also connections with people, and also there's the work as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what I'll do now is I think I'd like to switch over to these images, and I'll start with your work, Judy. If you can just briefly discuss Holes in the Land. Your work that you produced, a series of etchings 5 years ago. Can you tell us the story of this work? It's just absolutely outstanding. It's beautiful. I'll start with the first in the series.
Okay, so I was doing a residency at the British Museum along with a number of other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander artists. And I was really interested in the idea of the British Museum as a cultural institution, but an imposed cultural institution that swallowed culture. And I liked the idea of using the plans of the British Museum as the bones in the work. I guess I'd done a previous series of prints looking at Thomas Jefferson's effect on slavery and his family story. So I want to use a similar approach where I used architectural plans, and then I looked at objects, cultural objects, which had been taken or stolen or exchanged or bartered, I would say probably stolen, from Australia, and have those floating across. And with some of like this is Petri bags here, and the Petri bags are incredible. You know, I first came to know some of these objects back in 1995, beginning of 1996, when I had the Mott and Shandon residency, and I decided to come over and see what Aboriginal cultural objects were in overseas museums. And in this case, I was looking in London and Cambridge and Oxford. And at the British Museum, they've just got such an amazing collection from all over Australia. This one here, you can see the beautiful hairstring skirts. And when I think of hairstring skirts, I think about the hair from people's heads, the fact that they would be rolled on your leg, sometimes using possum fur as well. That would be picking up the person who's doing the rolling, their DNA. There's also the hair from the head, whoever wears the skirt. And so all of those old people are still within those objects. Those objects have been taken, stolen, confiscated, whatever, taken across the seas. The old people are still in there. This one here is like the blood on the floor, and this is actually the plan for the plumbing in the British Museum.
Oh, right.
So I'm sort of making comment on a lot of those things. And then the next one has got a plan of the cases where objects might be displayed. And the background, I think, is a little bit like skin. It almost looks like prosciutto. So I'm imagining, because many people's objects, many people's artefacts, and in fact people themselves have been displayed in cases like this. So I had, back in 97, made a series of prints called Our Bones in Your Collections, Our Hair in Your Collections, Our Skin in Your Collections. And in a way, this is like a flayed skin behind. And then the plan for the cases in which these might be displayed. So it's really sort of looking at that whole idea of cultural ownership and disenfranchisement once those objects have been taken away. And in a way, when I'm making these works, it's like a form of cultural retrieval.
Yeah. And do you think that it's this way of making has been pretty constant for you? Because I'm thinking of this fantastic what a segue. I'm thinking, that was not on purpose, actually, but I'm thinking of this, the preponderance of Aboriginal blood, this fantastic artist book, this publication, and your first publication, the first run of this was 2005, right?
Yes,
and
that's right.
The second print was this year.
Yes.
Can you tell us
yeah, sure.
a bit about, yes, about this work, but also I see a similar way in which you are, I guess, distributing the ink, and also I'm thinking about the washes and the wash effect that is part of much of your paintings. It's this beautiful way I feel I can identify a lot of your work. Do you see that commonality?
I do, because I love the wash effect, and I went down to Tasmania to study lithography, and that's where I learnt to manipulate what's called touche washes, where you mix grease, which is the touche, into the water, and as it dries it leaves a beautiful rippled water effect. It's almost like the tide's gone out and then left all of the grease lines in its wake. And I feel it's very skin-like, and in fact the effect in French is peau de crapaud, or skin of the toad, but it's a very, very beautiful medium to play with. And so then I've just translated the idea of the lithographic wash, in this case, into printmaking, and I bring it into works in canvas or works in public artwork as well, because I think it's like a fluency that carries my ideas with it. And this particular book, when I first did it, it was part of an exhibition of artist books where artists were being asked to respond to Queensland women and the right to vote. And I thought, well, of course, I want to talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and the right to vote. And I went to a talk by Loris Williams, who was the first Aboriginal archivist, which was absolutely fantastic, called Casting the Vote. And it had all these amazing documents in her talk. And I asked her permission to reproduce those within this artist book. And the archival material has been gifted to Department of Family Histories and the archives, so that other people, not just from the original families, can see this and see how Aboriginal people were contained, were segregated, were treated, and what they had to do in order to vote, in order to marry. And of course, I looked at those documents and I thought, that's what I really want to work with.
Yeah.
So, there's
so
categories
important.
Like half blood, which later became half caste, and there's documents that have been written on. So it's really critiquing and playing with those documents and trying to, I think as artists, we take notice of things, and then I want to put it out to the general public to take notice of this as well and realise this is what we lived through, this is what our families lived through, and be aware that this is part of your history as well. Yeah,
and it's a truth that is undeniable. It is not a produced work. It is this is part of the history of this country, and it's I think this work is just so very, very important. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.
I think I'd like to talk to you, Carol, now about your unbelievable new cloak as part of Rite of Passage, Wreath for Oodgeroo, which you have created especially for this exhibition. Can you please discuss?
Thank you. So the possum skin cloak is titled Wreath for Oodgeroo, and Oodgeroo Noonuckle, or Kath Walker, was a Quandamooka black rights activist. She was a poet, an artist, an environmentalist, an educator, and she was also an auntie, sister, mother. And she has inspired so many of us and so many people. So I was reading about her work, and I didn't know that how much of an activist that she was. I knew about her poems, her beautiful poems, and I knew of some of her artwork. And I was reading that she led a march in 1970. It was a protest march, and it was from the Sydney Aboriginal mission, La Perouse or Garawal, where they were marching from the mission to the ocean, and they threw wreaths into the water, like these mourning wreaths. And since they've been doing this since 1938, and they've been laid at La Perouse to mourn the losses and mark the 1770 landing of Lieutenant Cook in Kamai or Botany Bay, and the beginning of dispossession and mourning the loss of land. So in the 1970s, there was a bicentennial protest which Judy led, and it boycotted and challenged the birth of modern Australian celebrations and the reenactments that were also happening at the same time, and they were being watched by Queen Elizabeth across the bay. So by declaring a day of mourning, and they threw these funeral wreaths into the water, and they were aimed to drift, and I always imagine this beautiful scene of these wreaths drifting in Botany Bay and floating by the royal party. And so to me, the activism is just so, it was just imagining that, but also in my practice, I look at what was here before colonisation, particularly in plants. I'm just gardening and plants, and the use, the Aboriginal deep knowledges that we held and our ancestors held with the use of plants is so important in my practice. So I really wanted to acknowledge Oodgeroo's responsibility for the earth and the love for her country in Wreath for Oodgeroo. So it's a compilation of native plants found on Minjerribah, and it's almost as if Oodgeroo could gather familiar flowers from her country to create a wreath. And to me, this is her wreath, and it's a rich metaphor for the spirituality and the connection of Aboriginal people to country and to all living things. So I did a lot of research, and I had a lot of help with this. And I want to thank Uncle Ray Walker, Oodgeroo's grandson, to help me with this project, and also I asked for permission. But it was... and Karen, I had also help over on Minjerribah with Karen Anderson, who's a Quandamooka Kalalea Waka Waka man, and he shared his knowledge with the plants, and we did quite a bit of walking around on Minjerribah, taking images. And so then I also studied books, but I've only used ochres that have been gifted to me through my projects, my cloak projects and my community projects, and ash from local native trees like iron bark and spotted gum, which I've burnt in our fires. We have fires here every night. So yes, it was a really important project, and I never know how these cloaks are going to turn out, and I just do them with my heart, and also with acknowledging all the people that are involved in these projects. And never, to me, I'm doing them alone. So, but I think that this Wreath for Oodgeroo really looks at that sovereignty of our country. It wasn't terra nullius. Country is loved, still is, and also just that whole, those deep cultural knowledges, biocultural knowledges that our people held and still hold.
Thanks, Carol. That's fantastic. And I just think when you talk about that story, I think about how performative the protest was, and the timing of the royals being there in front of the water, and the wreaths drifting in front of them, and the cloak is such a respectful, I guess, ode to how great a person she was and will always be remembered.
Definitely, yeah.
So I must thank you for your time today, and I think one thing I'd like to just ask as we conclude today is if you had anything, just a brief comment about how you feel the exhibition has been. The exhibition is a touring exhibition, for those who don't know. The exhibition has just concluded at the QUT Art Museum in Brisbane, and the next and final place for the exhibition is NorthSite Contemporary Arts in Cairns. So just in closing, I'd love to hear just a brief mention about how you feel about Rite of Passage. Carol?
Rite of Passage for me was an incredible opportunity to have a voice, and I thank you, Shannon, for putting this together. You've been an amazing curator, I have to say that. And having a voice is so important because our ancestors and also even our parents and grandparents didn't have a voice. And when you go through the exhibition, there's so many artists, important artists with important works, singing and mapping out songlines across all of Australia with some of the works and some of the different mediums that are included. But each work has got such powerful stories behind it, and they've all been well thought out with the artists, and I really thank you for that. And I think that it's really important that we do have these voices and we do have these, what I call footsteps, so that others can follow in our footsteps. So I appreciate the opportunity, and it is a fabulous exhibition. Stunning.
It is.
Thank you.
I love it. And Judy, what are your thoughts?
I just loved spending time in the exhibition, and luckily it was during lockdown. I sort of almost had it to myself. I think there were only three of us in the space.
Yes.
And it was just such a privilege to be able to go and see each artist's work and to travel their journey with them and to really feel all the effort that had gone into it too by you and everybody at QUT who'd worked on the project, but also the artists themselves. So I really felt like it was an osmosis almost in the space, listening and learning and receiving that knowledge. And I think it's a fabulous place to go and spend time with your family and your loved ones, and also to promote to other people. And it's a real testimony to what you can do. And I love the fact that there's lots of generations of different people within the exhibition as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, you two, for your time today. I'll have to leave it there. I hope to see you again very soon, and I'm not very good at saying goodbye. So I'll wave goodbye. See you later.
Bye.